and welcome to the First Congregational Church of Lanesburg's weekly online service. Thank you for joining me today in this digital space. My name is Troy, for those of you who haven't seen me in the past on here, and I'll be your host today. Today we are coming up on the 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and we continue the series King Jesus, which leads us up to the final Sunday of Ordinary Time, which is called Christ the King Sunday. This week, Pastor Tom will be exploring Mark 13, which is Jesus' critique of the times in his day as the kingdom built by the powerful elite. And Pastor will be looking at ways to connect this to our own situation, our own here and now, and hopefully everybody can get a nugget or two of something useful, some kind of a little bit of enlightenment as we move in our own everyday lives. As always, we will have a few poems, we'll have some readings, prayers, some blessings as we try to process the information along the way. I wish you blessings on the journey.
Then help me, step by step, my guide and friend. Preserve me, oh my God, in whom I trust. My other goods are nothing in the end. How quickly they decay, how swiftly they rust. But through it all, you stay and comfort me, my one abiding joy, when all the rest have flown so suddenly. For now I see my true inheritance. Now I look up and find you still beside me, showing me the path of life. In your right hand, the cup of blessings, full to overflowing. Your left hand upholds me still and gives me hope. I have goodly heritage. You pour on me your graces, undeserved. You raise and comfort me until I fall no more. This was Psalm 16, retold by Malcolm Guite.
We light this candle to remind us of the humanity of Christ, who lived a full human experience like us. So we can now embrace every facet of our humanity, body, mind, and heart, as a part of our call to become like God. We light this candle to remind us of the divine nature of Christ, who overcame with love every evil we conceived, and whose resurrection proves to all the world that love overcomes evil, sin, and even death.
Today's passage actually sparks a childhood memory for me, and I thought I'd like to share that with you. Now remember, I was 8 years old, walking home from school, and it seemed to pass by awfully quick that day, a lot faster than I normally remember. And I came around the side of the house and I entered into the house, and I found it absolutely empty. But there was signs of recent activity. There was a steaming cup of tea on the table, lightly running faucet, a half-eaten plate of food. And all of a sudden, my 8-year-old heart was filled with fear as I realized, oh crap, I've been left behind. The rapture has happened. The faith of my early years was filled with all of these scary images of the end of the world, which were preached by these television evangelists who interpreted the book of Revelation by using like common modern day news headlines of the day, side by side, Bible in the headlines. And my 8-year-old self thought, oh my gosh, I knew I shouldn't have cussed on the playground today. I knew I was getting myself into trouble today. And now Jesus has come back and left me here to fend for myself through the great tribulation. Oh man. But really, my mom had just run next door, like to give the neighbor something or something silly like that. But I grew up inside this dominant Western evangelical understanding of what we called the end times. Now, theologians call this eschatology, which means the study of the end of time or the end of things, so the conclusion of things. And this Western evangelical understanding of the end of everything dominated much of my younger life. And it says that Jesus is about to come back at any moment and snatch all his people off the earth in an event called the rapture, which will then, it's going to spark a great tribulation. And in the great tribulation, there's going to be natural disasters and wars. It's basically hell on earth for everyone left behind. And it's going to disrupt all of our comfortable ways of living. And then the world's going to be led by this evil dictator called the Antichrist. And it was always suspiciously believed that it was whatever the current Democratic president or presidential candidate was at the time was obviously going to be that person or in danger of being that person. And that person is going to deceive the majority of people into thinking that he's totally awesome. And then there's a few people who are actually going to live through the 7 years of hell on earth called the Great Tribulation and be faithful and then be saved by the second coming of Jesus after 7 years of nastiness on earth. So that was kind of the upbringing that fed that fear within me when I got home and I saw everything there. Oh my gosh. And now we wonder why we're all traumatized now when this is like the feeding story that we tell ourselves. Now later in life, I learned that this is not Orthodox Christian theology, but it's some weird blend of cultural folk stories started by people that claimed special knowledge in their head that God had spoken to them specifically. And then they started a following with the special knowledge, and then they proliferated their ideas that played on human fear. That just used good marketing and distribution of written resources to get their ideas all the way across everywhere. Now, who are some of these folks, you might ask? Well, I decided to dive into this and take a look. So let's take a quick peek and we'll look at some of these doomsday prophets. Now, this mentality of fearing the end with anxiety and worry is not a new thing. Doomsday prophets have come and gone, and their words have fallen flat every single time. Did a little historical study for us here, and I got a small list for you. For instance, German mathematician and astrologer Johannes Stoffler. Sounds like a pastry, but it's not. He was German mathematician. He predicted that a great flood was going to cover the earth on February 25th. What year are we talking? 1524, when all of the known planets would be in alignment under Pisces. The stars in the sky, Pisces, a water sign. And all this alignment was going to cause a big, huge global flood, killing everybody. He had hundreds of pamphlets announcing the coming of the flood and set this general panic in motion. And this nobleman named Count von Egelheim, which is the funniest German name I've ever heard in my life, he went so far as to build a 3-story ark to protect himself from the coming flood. Luckily, he had resources to pull this off. Though there was only light rain on the day of the predicted flood, no actual flooding materialized. Didn't happen. Then, right around the turn of the 19th century, in Leeds, England, a chicken, yes, a chicken, kept popping out eggs with the words, "Christ is coming," on the eggs that it popped out of his backside. Now, hundreds of people flocked, get it, flocked, see what I did there, to see the sight. And it caused so much fear and despair that Judgment Day was upon them. Everyone was freaking out, but it turned out that the chicken's owner was actually taking the eggs the chicken laid, writing the message on the egg, and then putting them back in the chicken so that the chicken can lay the egg with the message again later. I know what you're thinking, very creepy. And yes, you're right, because that is creepier than creepy. Now, one of the most modern and prolific end of times people, his name is Harold Camping. He actually was very modern. Right around 2012 or so, he started to publicly predict that the end of the world, well, he actually predicted it 12 times. But 12 times is a charm, right? No, it came wrong every time, 12 times. And he based his interpretations on this biblical numerology code and moon cycles and weird old calendars. And then finally in 1992, he published this book ominously titled 1994, ? Yeah, 2 years left, which predicted the end of the world. Didn't happen. But then he started predicting more and more and more. And his most recent prediction was for May 21st, 2011, a day that he calculated was exactly 7,000 years after the great biblical flood in the narrative of Genesis. And he had millions of supporters donate money, which he then invested into billboards that went all over the nation to warn people. One was actually just a few miles from my house at the time. And I remember seeing that billboard and saying, what in the world is this going on here? Now, when that date actually came and passed without incident, he said he was, quote, flabbergasted that the end didn't happen. Really? After 11 times being wrong, you're flabbergasted you're wrong the 12th time. Humans seem to have this obsession with the apocalyptic folk tales, and Christians are absolutely no different than anyone else. And we have our own apocalyptic folks. Pat Robertson, you remember Pat Robertson? He predicted the end of the world was going to be in 1982. It's not 1982 anymore. We're still around. Hal Lindsey predicted the end in 1984, 5, somewhere in there, with his popular book, The Late Great Planet Earth. And then we had that huge Left Behind series, which became movies and books and all that stuff. It was all based on Hal Lindsey's really bad theology. Then we had Jack Van Impe, his pseudo-news shows where he read the Bible alongside current news stories and excitedly bouncing in his chair. I remember watching him bouncing in his chair over really bad news, declaring, "I knew it, Rexella. I predicted this exactly." And Rexella would say, "Yes, Jack. Yes, you did, Jack." I remember that. And then we have John Hagee, really modern day person. He had that whole recent blood moon cycles. Every time a full moon was out, he's like, "Oh my God, it's the end of the world. Here it comes." I find it mind-boggling that our system of belief, which is based upon hope and good news, becomes so obsessed with doomsday and apocalyptic ends. I don't understand it. It breeds fear. It brings anxiety. It encourages moral conformity to ensure the safety of its adherents. It doesn't sound very hopeful to me. We keep doing this over and over and over again. I really like that Father Kenneth Tanner, one of my homeboys, Father Kenneth Tanner, says this about this type of thinking, about conspiracy theories and all. His quote says, "Conspiracy theories are a form of Gnostic heresy. They all claim that only an enlightened few know what is actually going on in the world, and what everyone else knows is a lie. That the knowledge available to the average person on the street is unreliable or false. And these theories prey on those who live in fear and increase their everyday anxiety. They are a scourge." That's some good stuff, Father Kenny. Thank you for writing those words. Thank you for writing those words. And this message of the good news should fill us with hope and not fear. This message of the good news is not something that should fill us with anxiety, but peace. So let's keep this in mind as we hear today's scripture being read, because it is one of these apocalyptic pieces, and we're going to interpret it with some of those filters we got in our brains. And we're going to explore a little bit of it on the other side. We'll see you in a minute.
Good morning. Today's reading is from Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, see what wonderful stones and buildings." However, Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? By no means will a stone be left here upon a stone and not be thrown down." As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives with the temple in view, Peter, James, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign when these things are to come to a conclusion?" So Jesus began to tell them, "Look out that nobody misleads you. Many will come on the basis of my name, saying, 'I am he,' and will mislead many. Moreover, when you hear of wars and reports of wars, do not be alarmed. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in one place after another. There will also be food shortages. These are a beginning of pangs of distress." Have a good morning.
All right, so this story starts off with Jesus leaving somewhere. He's leaving the temple area. Now, if you remember last week, the story of the widow and the two mites, Jesus did some shaking things up by criticizing the entire temple system for robbing a widow out of her meager life savings. So when he's leaving the temple, he's not happy. He's filled with sadness. He's filled with indignation. He's filled with a little bit of contempt for what he just saw. Now the passage goes on to say, one of his followers said to him, "Teacher, look at how big these stones are. What beautiful buildings." Now obviously, can you just imagine witnessing a family member like sued by a large bank conglomerate for everything they had? They lose everything, have to claim bankruptcy and wind up out on the street, and then you walk by the bank and someone says, "Look at this beautiful building. Look at the architecture of this place. Isn't it so good?" And you're just sitting there thinking to yourself, "I hate this place. Look what it did to my family member," right? So I'm trying to imagine the look on Jesus' face in response to this disciple. Like, was he dumbfounded? Was he just looking at him like, excuse me, did you just see what I just saw? Was he saddened by their lack of understanding? Was he agitated? Was he irritated? I have no idea. But his response to this disciple is very telling. Jesus says, "Do you see all these great buildings here? They will all be destroyed." Nice one, Jesus. "Every stone will be thrown down to the ground. Not one stone will be left on another." Nice reply, Jesus. So now I'm trying to imagine the look on the disciples' faces as they're walking through like their Disneyland, you know, the temple grounds, like, "Wow, look at this, look at this, look at that. This is amazing." So are they going to be confused? Are they going to be offended? Are they going to be scared? I don't know. I really don't know what the interaction looked like or felt like. But I do know that Jesus' response is not what they expected at all. Because they're in Jerusalem for Passover. This is the high and holy time of the year where pilgrims like flock from all over Jerusalem. And they grew the population of that city from 40,000 to somewhere near or even exceeding 500,000 people in just 160 acres plot of land. Now these people, their entire histories, their entire heritage, their calendar observance, their food prohibitions, their traditions, their family, everything that they have are all built on traveling to this place at this time for this act. And then just to hear that this is all going to be overthrown and destroyed is beyond shocking and probably a little bit terrifying to hear that. Like if the sun were to suddenly disappear from our solar system in some magical poof of dust, all of the planets that rotate around the gravity of the sun would just fly off into cold space because the gravity of that central force is what holds us here. When the central pin is removed from something around which your whole life revolves, it destabilizes everything, right? You lose a job around which your schedule rotated and your bills were paid and your identity was formed. Or you lose a loved one that kept the family together, right? Through their presence and through their parties and keeping everyone gathered together at holiday times. Or you lose an aspect of your health that does not allow you the accessibility that you once had. When these things come undone, it feels like the whole world is on fire all around us. It feels like everything's crumbling, everything's falling apart when the central gravity piece is missing. How does Jesus proceed. Let's take a look. Now you can tell that this response didn't sit well with the disciples. They didn't know how to respond, but they just kind of sat with that information for a while. Because it says in the next phrase, later, Jesus was sitting at a place on the Mount of Olives. He was alone with Peter, James, and John, and Andrew. And they could all see the temple, and then they asked Jesus, tell us, when will these things happen? And what will show us that it is time for them to occur? So this is a weird question, but they've been brewing on this for all day. It was an awkward interaction. It was an awkward interaction between Jesus and the disciples. And they're not sure what to do with it, because the building around which their whole understanding of the world and God and culture and their place within it is the backdrop of this fearful conversation. It's off in the back. It says that they can see it. So it's almost as if they're trying to process a terminal disease which was just diagnosed with them. And how often have we heard that the response is always, well, how much time do I have left? Maybe they're asking in that kind of a phrase. They hear the termination of the temple system, which they know so well, and how much time do we have left? Now Jesus answers with a really confusing phrase about not being fooled by those who claim the role of Savior. It doesn't seem to answer their question, so why did he say this? Now we got to remember that the passage right before this was about the temple culture devouring widows' houses by demanding that they give in order to remain in good standing with the community. Now, even if it's their own, like their last two coins they have to live on, the elite religious leaders who padded their pockets with these donations didn't even bat an eye. And nobody around them even noticed through the festive holiday giving and the clanking of all the things, all their traditions, nobody even noticed the evil that was baked into the temple system until Jesus calls it out and says, look at this woman over here. She gave more than everybody else. Now, because God demanded love and equity that was outside the temple system's ability to perform, instead of changing and reforming what they already have, they doubled down and they crucified God because he wasn't holy enough. Think about that for a minute. They wanted a Messiah who was going to come in and use the temple and all of the temple system as a weapon against the world, specifically the Roman government, to then create an ethnic and religious dominance of their people and their thinking and their ways over everyone else as ruler. But Christ refused to do this, and he refused to enslave himself to the corruption that existed within the temple system. To have someone come into an evil system and claim that they're the savior that can fix it all is absolutely foolish, because the systems that are built and maintained for over centuries, sometimes millennia, will enslave anybody who enters into it, even if they have the best of intentions, even if they have the most authority over it. And this is what the Old Testament calls idolatry. Idolatry, we think of worshiping like stone statues or gold statues or something, and we think, how could they be so dumb? But it's not that. Idolatry is to make a sacrifice of yourself to a demanding unseen force. Think about that. Today we call it different things like the economy or politics. It's just the way things are. Or the justice system or international relations, right? It's when we know we ought to act one way, but then unseen forces from above, whatever they are, we deem them with different names, demand that we act a different way. That costs us something in our character. And these systems that are built upon these things, eventually, they fall apart. Now the disciples, they fear a crumbling kingdom. They fear the crumbling kingdom all around them. Because evil, good, or a blend of the two, our routines, our comforts, our plans, and our expectations all depend upon the structures that these things have built. I don't blame the disciples for feeling a little bit of apprehension at Jesus' words. I mean, that's scary stuff to see that something that you've rotated your life around is coming to an end. But this is what an apocalypse is. It's all about. It means the unveiling or the uncovering. That's what the word apocalypse means. so that when something is unveiled or uncovered, we can see behind the basic appearance and operation of something to all of the backs that this something was unjustly built upon. When this revelation takes place, it's no wonder everything crumbles all the way around it. So I all the more appreciate Jesus' words, how he closes this passage out with a lot of hope. He says, do not be afraid. These things must happen before the end comes. Then he gives a little bit of scary stuff. Nations are going to fight against other nations. Kingdoms are going to fight against other kingdoms. That's not news, because nations and kingdoms do that all the time. And he says there will be times when there is no food for people to eat. The systems that these nations that built, right, they fall apart, and there will be earthquakes in different places. These things are only the beginning of troubles. And we think it's the end. This is only the beginning of troubles, like the first pains of a woman giving birth. Now, it sounds like a little bit of doomsday stuff going on here, but this is actually, he closes it out with the illustration of childbirth. So Jesus is not speaking here of the end of the world or the end of all things, but the end of their world and the end of their things, the end of their temple system. The one that chose to live by the sword is the one that chose to die by the sword as well. They're going to rise up in military rebellion against Rome and be sacked in 70 AD. The one that chose a temple ritual over a widow's life and well-being, the one that chose to keep the powerful in power and the vulnerable in their dangerous vulnerability, that system will crumble. And all of the ways that we depended on that system will crumble. You see, as humans, we can't seem to build this equitable system, so eventually it just crumbles. And we keep doing this over and over again, like a song on repeat. It's the natural cycle of living and dying and rebirth of something new. The thing that keeps us rebirthing vision and dreams of justice and equity is the word hope. And that's where Jesus comes in. Don't be afraid. This is all a part of a rebirth of something. Now, hope is the perfect cocktail of faith, desire, and expectancy. What is that? Is all very fancy words. Faith, what is it? It's an intuitive confidence of something that you don't necessarily have external evidence of. And desire is a seed of longing planted in the soul for goodness and truth and beauty to be expressed in this world. And then expectancy is an anticipation for the day then all these things come to fruition. And hope is this perfect, beautiful cocktail of all three of those things put together. Now, hope does not deny that things may look grim, or things are not crumbling, or things are not on fire all around us. Certainly in today's world, hope shouldn't divert our eyes from what is actually going on. Hope has to start there and then live into the possibility of what could be and should be and will one day be. Hope does not encourage wishful thinking. It believes in faith that things can be put right and expects them to be put right. And then we make adjustments in our life so that we can make a small contribution to the putting back to rights of all things. This is at the heart of our faith. This is what the kingdom of God coming into our world is all about. And that's why I really believe passionately that this is why Christians should be on the forefront of things like caring for the poor, and caring for the refugee, and caring for the sick, and caring for the dying, caring for the disabled, caring for our climate and our planet, caring for the advancement of science, caring for the creation of art and expression, caring for racial reconciliation and justice, caring for gender and sexuality issues. If it's true of what is to come, when we think about heaven, when we think about God, when we think about perfection, if it's true there, then we should be in the act of building it now. So when we think of the end of all things and the end of everything and the return of our King into this world, it should be a joyous event, anticipated, because our King brings the fulfillment of what all human hearts secretly long for, and a realization of what our lives and communities have been so long striving to create. So I want to send you out today with a benediction from a beautiful voice, a controversial voice, and a very intelligent voice, a man named Cornel West. He's an American philosopher. He's a social activist. He's a social critic. He's an intellectual. He's a transcendentalist. which is a really cool word for philosopher. And I'd add a modern day prophet that we need to be listening to. So let's hear what Cornel West has to say about our faith and go create some contagious beauty.
And now for our benediction. To be a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, is to love wisdom, love justice, and love freedom. This is the radical love in Christian freedom and the radical freedom in Christian love. If Christians do not exemplify this love and freedom, then we side with the nihilist of the Roman Empire, who put Jesus to a humiliating death. To be a Christian is to live dangerously, honestly, freely. To step in the name of love as if you might land on nothing, yet to keep on stepping. Because the something that sustains you, no empire can give you, and no empire can take away. This is the kind of vision and courage required to enable the renewal of the prophetic, democratic, Christian identity. This is by Cornel West.
Hello again, and thank you for joining us in our online service this week. We hope that it was a blessing. We all consider you a blessing to our fellowship. If in your mind you have any desire to do a little bit more, maybe the question of what now is springing up in your head, we have a few easy ideas. Number one, if you'd like to participate, feel free to send us a message. Let us know that you would like to do a reading, a prayer. Tom can guide you. He has lots of ideas each week and lots of slots that anybody that's willing to participate. It's always a joy to see new faces and old ones. And all it takes is a simple phone recording. Number two, you can partner with us if you'd like to ensure the continuation of the online services. You can hit the link below, and that'll tell you where to go from there. And number three, subscribe. If you watch on YouTube, subscribe. If you watch on Facebook, give us a like, connect with us, and by doing so, you stay in the loop for any new changes, updates, activities, both in the online world and in the real world. So digitally or otherwise, stay connected. We certainly hope you find some hope, help, and healing with the services and in your everyday life. And look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you.
Doomsday, we're all gonna die. Do you like my beard? Just go in.
Hi, good morning. Today's reading is Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 8.
Why am I traumatized?